What's going on, guys? I know it's been a while since I made a video, but I just haven't had anything to upload. The car's been driving so nice that I've just been enjoying it as a daily. I haven't even really done any testing or anything yet, but I figured that it's been a while, and I got something in the mail, so we're gonna do a kind of different video. I get a lot of DMs on Instagram, and they're all kind of the same question, so I figured let's make a video a little bit more in-depth on flashing keys, since I got these. So this is an OEM G35 key, I believe. I know that there's two different versions. The normal one that most people use is just the key, but it has a chip in it, so you can turn the engine over. But this one actually has the trunk button as well as unlock and lock, so pretty nice. I actually got these as a kit, so it's like two
One eternity later.
But I also just want to cover a couple basic questions that I get a lot. So we're gonna cover where I get parts, common failures on this platform, and just some like quick diagnostic tips, because I see a lot of speculation on the forums, people with like no starts and stuff like that, and they're always going through this list of like, oh, check the mass airflow, check this, check that. And I think this would just save people a lot of time, because these cars only have a couple problems, but they're all kind of the same. So let's get to it. First up, the number one killer of these cars is oil. I get a lot of questions about different problems. During the discussion, I'll often bring up what's your oil change interval, and I know several cars that have, not perfect maintenance, but very good maintenance, and have ended up with oil starvation or just general bottom end issues. So these cars absolutely need fresh oil. They need oil every 3,700 miles. That's what the factory service manual calls for, or every 5,000 kilometers. In fact, I actually tend to do it a little bit earlier than that. The last oil change I did was probably closer to like 4,000 kilometers. So like, what is that, 3,000 miles? And the oil was getting pretty gassy. It's getting kind of dark. So it's one of those things where we have a lot of sensors and a lot of stuff that is based off of oil pressure. So not only are the oil galleries very, very narrow in this engine, but all the VVT, solenoids, all this stuff is based off of oil pressure. So if you have an engine that's 150,000 miles or older, you should honestly go up a grade of oil, unless you're really, really on top of it, because a 5W30 will shear down, about 70% of its life, and you really don't want that 30%, 20% of its life to be anything less than a 5W30. So I use a 0W40 Mobile 1, the European formula, but really just get any top brand oil that is cheap. Like my go-to, everyone asks, are you Pennzoil, are you Mobile? Honestly, any of those big brands, Pennzoil Ultra, Platinum, the Castrol 5W40 is really nice. The Mobile 1 5W40 and 0W40 are awesome oils, but just go to Walmart, go to your local store and see what's on sale, and then buy a lot of it and have it on standby, and really just be ready to change the oil frequently, because it will just prolong the life of these cars tremendously. So another thing that wears out on these cars is the intake boot. So I've got lots of DMs from people, and on these they have a little accordion, and in between those accordions will develop little cracks, and that will create a vacuum leak, and the car definitely won't run right, and they are very, very hard to find. Your best bet is to make one, honestly, unless you can find one for cheap at a junkyard and it's in good shape. The 2003 to 2005 M45 boot will work as well. I'm not sure if the 2006 does. It really should, but I know that the other ones work, and they actually don't have the internal baffles, which is kind of nice. But if you can't find one, they're like $300 or $400 on eBay, because they're that rare. But really, you just need a 45-degree silicone elbow and have a hole for the VIS line. That's what this is. It's usually on this side. And then you need a hole for the breather. Now this setup is total overkill, and honestly I'd rather have it plastic. The heat soak isn't ideal with aluminum, but really you could get someone to make this for way cheaper than you can get them on eBay. So another thing, I definitely talked about it like crazy on this channel, but if you haven't seen any of my other videos, these two grounds, so this is called F8 and F9, and these grounds are responsible for a ton of stuff, like the ECU, TCM, O2 sensors, the throttle body, There's just a ton of stuff on this. Like, majority of the 5 volt ref is grounded here. So check those grounds. There is a TSB where it basically tells people to unbolt them and then retighten them. And with all the stuff that I've done with this car, they are very finicky. So I suggest unbolting them and just a light sand with a 2000 grit or something. Get that bare metal nice and shiny, and then tighten them back down. And you can also inspect that harness, right? This harness will come up, it goes down and then back up along here, and we'll route on the back. So just inspect the harness, any points where it can rub. As you can tell, I've already cut mine apart. That was a whole rabbit hole we won't go down, but yeah, they are prone to failure. One of my friends has a 2003 Q45 and he had a ton of corrosion in his as well. So just be aware that that is something to check. And honestly, just the grounding in general. So the main ground, obviously this is all custom, but normally it's just one ground here, then it meets to the body and then over to the alternator. So undoing that and just sanding that surface and inspecting the cable itself will help. And honestly, just a generic upgrade, you know, even adding to the factory, you don't have to replace it, but just adding an extra ground. Don't do the whole grounding kit, that's kind of unnecessary, even though I've kind of done it. The big 3 is nice. A catch can is actually quite nice. I forgot that I had that. That's something that you could add to just a regular car that would help. These intakes get pretty gunked up without them. And if you're pushing it on oil changes and stuff like that, it's a compounding problem, because now you're getting more blow by, and that blow by is now getting back into the oil. It's just a problem that you can avoid with something that's like, I think these are like $80 on Amazon, and you could mount them in a more intelligent location than I have. This is honestly the worst place for them. But so another thing that I often see is people with no start conditions. So they get these cars used and they just, you know, they never run properly, or they'll intermittently stall. If you have any problem with the car staying running or not being able to start, the number one thing you check is your cam and crank sensor. So in these cars, we have, let me see if I can see it. So this is our cam sensor. There you are. So this sensor, I'm not gonna pull it out, but I'll put it up on the screen here. It has a twin brother. So the exact same sensor, exact same plug is underneath the car, right where the transmission meets the engine. It's pretty easy to get to, it's hard to miss. Exact same clip, just look for that little piece of green there. And these are, in my opinion, the number one thing you should check. So the problem is with these sensors, and I think it has to do with the weird grounding, is that a lot of the electrical issues could be caused by this. And so for my car, when I first got it, it would just randomly stall. You know, you'd be driving, everything's fine, performance was fine, and then randomly you'd be sitting at a light and it would just stall. And it wouldn't have any check engine lights or anything. And I had this for like 7 months. Literally just randomly, I would just be prepared to just fire it back up. And it always fired right back up. But a lot of people, when they have these sensors go, it won't fire right back up. And when I actually discovered what it was, one of the last times that it stalled, it actually wouldn't start. It would crank for a good minute or so before it would fire back up. And basically, that sensor and the sensor underneath the car, they talk to each other and tell the computer where in the rotation the engine is. So if any of those sensors input doesn't work, you can get weird stumbles, no start conditions, stuff like that. So check that. If you are replacing these sensors, only use OEM. Hitachi makes them, and there has been a revision. So I'll show you what the new ones look like. They're a metal cylinder body versus the plastic body they used to be. Either one will be fine. If you can find the old style for cheaper, get those. They are on Rock Auto. I'll include a part number. And the thing is with Rock Auto, which is a nice segue into where I get my parts from, is that some of the parts listed for the O2Q or O3M aren't always listed in the same way. So if you look under cam crank sensor for the O2Q, it shows them, but it's a different supply. Whereas if you just look up the part number for the Hitachi sensor, it shows the revision, and there'll be plenty in stock. So it's one of those things where if you know the part number, you can get them a little cheaper. I see them listed, places for like $150 to $200. I know the dealership, they're very expensive. I think they're a $200 sensor. On Rock Auto, they're $70. So nice segue to where we get our parts from. Parts are very, very hard to find. For the most part, if you have an O2Q, you have pretty much full support. There's only a handful of obviously body stuff, bigger components that are going to be tricky to find. So for like big stuff like an intake manifold or, you know, the intake boot, stuff like that, you're going to have to use eBay and Facebook groups. So I'm going to list a couple of these groups. Now, they're not specifically for Q45s, but they have a lot of the JDM cars, so the Cimas and stuff like that. So you often see a lot of the crossover, the same members. But I'll list those in the description. Another site that I like is Partsook. Partsook.com has a really weird UI. It's kind of difficult to navigate, but they have engine mounts for unbelievably cheap, and they're OEM. So engine mounts for these cars they're very expensive. I think at a dealership they're around $275 per side, which is crazy. This is Canadian, so you know, a little less than that if you're in the States, but still not cheap. And on Partsook, I think they were $67, and shipping, they actually came from Dubai. And funny enough, it was faster than most shipping I get from the States. So legit site. Again, a little tricky to navigate. Like if you just Google or if you just search engine mount on their website, it doesn't come up, but they're called engine mount insulators. So a little bit of finessing and you can find some parts in there. I haven't ordered anything but engine mounts, but I have seen that they have quite a few of the smaller bits and pieces as well. So some stuff that's discontinued is definitely worth a look on Partsook. For the majority, it's mostly from Rock Auto. So I know a couple people who watch this that have Y34 M45s. You're kind of in the same boat. Most of your parts are going to be coming from Rock Auto. I know that there are some parts that are not interchangeable. Like if you have a Y34M and you need a power window regulator, you are you're screwed. Essentially, you have to find junkyard cars or, you know, call distributors and find if they have them, you know, a discontinued part, because they just don't make them anymore. Whereas the F50Qs, we can just go on Rock Auto and pick them up for $100. But that's going to be it for parts. Facebook groups, word of mouth, Instagram. There's a few Instagram accounts that you can follow, and I'll list all that stuff in the description. But I think that's going to do it for parts, boys. I think we're going to go to the dealership and get these keys cut. Another question I get is, you know, which intake should I use? What muffler system should I use? What makes the most power? Unfortunately for you guys, there really isn't anything. There is, as you can tell, I use the stock intake, and I have gone through 3 or 4 revisions of the intake. I have an enclosed box. I used to have a system that came through the bumper. I had a little, you know, block off plate so that it kind of sealed to the hood, and they all kind of make the same power at wide open throttle. They're all gonna flow the same amount of air. The real restriction is the runners and the throttle body. So if you could put like a 90 mil throttle body and some different runners on this thing, you could probably start messing with the intake a bit more. But as it is currently, it really is just a sound. If you want more intake sound, you could throw it on a pod filter. But as far as airflow, I've gone through the computer and I actually measured the mass airflow voltage, and they all flow about the same at wide open throttle. There's a little bit of tip-in stuff that feels different, but the real difference that the stock intake, and the reason why I went back to it, is because low RPM, like 600 to 1,000, like the just creeping through traffic stuff, will make a lot more torque. And I think it's because the way that the air comes in, kind of narrowings, that I think will speed up the air. So having air velocity at low RPM will definitely pick up some efficiency there. And if the difference in wide open throttle is negligible, you're really just sacrificing fuel economy. So I went back to the stock intake. I have a whole video on how I ported it and gutted it and poured resin down it, and honestly, it is just pointless. There's really no need to do that. It was just me wasting time thinking I would get, you know, same thing with the throttle body. I ported the throttle body, and, you know, hours of work for a 0.1 horsepower and a slight better tip-in response. There's better things to spend your time on. So if you want performance out of these cars, you're going to be doing most of your work in the exhaust and the rear end. For the price of, you know, some Apexy intake or whatever these, you know, I can't even remember the name of them, the Weapon R intake, they're like $400. Go buy yourself a 3.3 or a 3.5 gear differential from a G35 and throw it in this thing, and then get rid of that center resonator and change the Y pipe to a true dual setup, so either H pipe or X pipe. Honestly, like, don't go down the road that I'm going down. Just do a couple tasteful mods and enjoy your car, because it is just, the dollar for horsepower mark for these things is just crazy, and unless you're going to go all the way like I am, there's really no point. So changing the center resonator, changing the mid pipe to a true dual, and having a shorter gear. If you're in an O2, you have a 276, which is very, very long. They are desirable, don't sell them. You could sell that differential to someone who has a CD09 swap, and it will be worth much more to them than it will be to you, because a 276 with this transmission is geared for like 230 miles an hour. Right, so I've got a 3.7, and I'm gonna run out of gear right when I'm electronically limited. So if you want that, but a little bit of fuel economy, I would say a 335 you could get out of a 2006 M45. They came in the 350Z autos as well. That would be a nice differential. If you want a little bit more fun, you could go to a 355, which was a manual 350Z rear end. There's a whole infographic from Z1 Motorsports on what years came with what differential ratio, but they all swap in. The only thing that can be a little tricky is the propeller shaft has to be swapped, and the prop shaft flanges have to be swapped, but it's all very simple. Nothing that a rear end shop can do. Yeah, it's honestly your real best bang for your buck. These things ran a 15.4, and when I had the 335 and the exhaust stuff, it ran a 14.28, which is a personal best. So yeah, you can shave off some time. You can get some wheel torque out of the rear end and some exhaust work, but the intake side, I think, is pretty much optimized for a factory engine. So unless you're going to be doing cams and, you know, going a little bit further, I would just leave it. It's a well-optimized system. So if you're not trying to race these things or get performance out of them, and you just want them to look cool, a lot of people ask me, like, how do you get this thing lower? And really, there's only really one option that I would suggest, which is BC coils. You can get them with the extreme low option if you want. You can get them with a Swift spring option, which is what I did. I don't have them installed yet, but I have the Swifts in there, just in the front. And it didn't lower it that much, as you can tell. It's definitely not, it's not even really flat, to be honest. The fronts are still got a little bit more of a gap than the rear, but the BC coils are the way to go because they come with a spindle welded on already. So the money you're gonna save for getting a cheaper set of coils, you're just gonna spend getting the spindles welded on.
A few moments later.
Okay, so we just pulled up to Applewood. If you're in the lower mainland, this is the best Nissan Infiniti dealership, in my opinion. They've definitely helped me out a couple times when they definitely didn't need to, doing like random. You know, I got these guys to like advance my timing and stuff before I knew how to do NDS. But anyways, gonna go in there and get them to cut up some keys, and then we're gonna drive back after I do some errands, and we're gonna program them. So another thing that I wanted to mention is what fluids are in what. So this is our power steering fluid, and it actually uses a automatic transmission fluid, and this actually is the same fluid as our hydraulic fan fluid. So if you have an O2 or O3, and I believe O3, O4M will have a hydraulic fan, and in O4 they went to an E fan, so you wouldn't have this. But if you do, automatic transmission fluid, I'm not exactly sure which spec, I'll put it up on the screen. I use the generic, I think I actually got it at the dealership, just their automatic transmission fluid, which is not to be confused with the actual automatic transmission fluid. So for this car, it came out with Matic J, and then at some point they switched over to Matic S. So Matic J is high viscosity and Matic S is low viscosity. If you read the internet, they'll tell you that you have to use Matic S or Matic J and nothing else will do. Well, in reality, that's not true. Castrol makes a multi-vehicle import. There's two, so be careful. One is for Ford and Honda, or sorry, Ford and Toyota, and the other one is for all of them. But they actually do mention Nissan, and if you look at the back, it is a similar spec as a Matic J, so it is a high viscosity. For low viscosity, you can use Valvoline Max Life, much cheaper than the Matic S, and essentially the same fluid. There is a few others, I believe Amsoil Signature Series will work, and it's kind of like an in-between. It's a thicker, low viscosity, but yeah, that's it for transmission fluid. Another thing that I noticed after doing the transmission seafoam treatment, don't mind the dusty screen, is how good the fuel economy is. I can't believe it. 17.1 miles per gallon combined. That's crazy. I've never had it that good. Okay guys, we got the keys and we got NDS. So I'm gonna plug this all in. Now this is gonna be a little bit new to me because oh shit. Time to go. Oh, y'all. Peace, man. Let's go home. Oh, showing off for the kids. Oh shit.
One eternity later.
Treat him. Twin Turbski Mustang. Dude, we had him to like 250 feet. Let's go. That was hilarious. He was not expecting it. The gears are awesome, dude. I'm telling you, 50 shot nitrous. Dude, that thing was twin turbo. Let's go. I don't know if he was trying to launch on that day or not, but I said, why not, brother?
One eternity later.
All right, boys, gotta conclude this chapter. So we are out in New West now. And yeah, it pretty much turns out that the key, I'm not sure why the chip doesn't work with NDS. I honestly couldn't tell you, but we used his chip cloning tool and we just cloned my existing key and then put that chip into this. So once this is cut, this will go in and turn the car over. We could not get the key fob.
A few moments later.
All right, boys, I'm home now, and I just wanted to clarify a couple things before I sign off. So the keys I was messing with earlier were basically replica Nissan Versa keys, and the reason why all these websites are saying that they're supported is because the chip that's inside here that talks to that antenna and disables the immobilizer, that is actually in a bunch of different keys, and it's called the Texas ID40. I'll put it up on the screen, but basically that chip is in a bunch of different keys. So it's in the G35 key, a couple other Nissan keys, but you should be able to take that key and get the blade cut so that it can manually open the trunk and the doors, and then you can use NDS to program that chip that's in there to disable the immobilizer and turn the car on. But to actually get the key fob functionality, you are limited to this key fob. So this has a FCC ID and it is specific to this car, to this model and this key fob. So there is no, like, you can go on one of these websites and get just a generic fob and do the BCM trick and get it to work. So if you want it all in one, you're limited to this guy. But if you just want a manual key that can turn the car on, you can use any of those. So anyways, I just want to clarify that. I got the key. I just need to go get it cut. But basically, I didn't even use NDS. The guy actually had a chip clone device. So he cloned my chip, and then we just put it up beside the little emergency key. I just held it up to the antenna and cranked it over and it fired up, no problem. So we are good. We got ourselves a spare key. It wasn't exactly how I wanted it, but at least we kind of know what will work and what won't. So I hope you guys found that helpful. And as always, I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.